They even do recruitment, and due to this, we need to advance our systems and also get to know what makes people join these extremist groups, and these extremist groups have changed their ways of recruitment since days before. They used to make a direct contract through calls, but today they use the internet so that they can promote their kind of thinking and their criminal activities and praise their activities. And now they use social media through the internet, whereby they speak from there and do all the activities from there, and through this network they speak secretly, whereby they can talk to a wider variety of people all over the world, and they share their views there very fast. And so as that we need to stop all that through taking all the necessary procedures in terms of extremism, to stop this extremism. And we need also to promote good values so that we can co-live together because of religion. And so we need to do this so that we can also save our community. And we need to stop all these terrorism activities so that we can stop all this, so that we can be able to stop all these terrorism activities in the international community. And also the United Nations has done this, and even Morocco has been able to do this. And because of this, in this fourth session, we will give you a presentation about our role in stopping this extremism and stopping it spreading, and we will also see what the countries have done to stop this extremism, even in the detention centers. And also we will in the session we will also see how we can be able to use the correct methods so as to stop extremism between prisoners. And now we will listen to the interventions of the experts in what relates to extremism and terrorism. And the presenter will be Dr. Rosaline Nyerere, and she is from in the Center of Counter-Terrorism in Kenya. And the first intervention, either it will be as Honorable Dodo Muhammad, and he's the DPP Nigeria, and then Dr. Nijar Migaz, and he's a consultant in Mozambique, and Miss Jidi Dawaru, and she's a witness from Witness Protection in Kenya, and Mr. Khalid Hussein, the Executive Director from Haki Africa from Kenya, and Mr. Michael Sang, the Assistant DPP in Kenya, and my fellow experts. Welcome to this session, and thank you very much.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to take you through a brief presentation on the role of prosecution in radicalization and handling of violent extremism. I will largely give the Kenyan experience and pose questions and points for consideration so that we can come with solutions together to the problems that we are starting to experience now in the global arena. So I have a presentation there that I will go through the presentation. And so I will start with the definition of terms as far as radicalization is concerned. And we say that radicalization, violent extremism is actually the standing away from the mainstream. Please show the presentation. Yes, violent extremism, like we see there, is just adherence to a set of beliefs and principles that are away from what most of the people think about, what we consider mainstream. And it's a person becomes an extremist because of believing what is assessed as to be away from the radical ideology. And it becomes violent when that person or the individual accepts violence as a means of achieving or enhancing their belief in whatever it is that they believe. While radicalization is a process of moving from the mainstream to the radical ideology. And a radical does not necessarily have to be a violent, but they can be violent depending on if they choose to be. So the movement from violent extremism, it starts with radicalization as a process and goes on to extremism, to violent extremism, and finally to terrorism. So if we are going to counter it, in most of the situations, countries have found themselves faced with terrorism. And therefore the first responses are actually countering terrorism. But you can only counter terrorism for so long. There is importance of actually going to the root of the problem and starting to counter the radicalization. So you find that most of the time, people will start with terrorism, then they'll go with countering of the extremism, and then counter radicalization. But in an ideal situation, we should not let for populations to get to terrorism. We should stop it actually at the point of radicalization. There are signs that we think that we need to observe and be alive to that lead to, for a person who is moving through the process of radicalization, and there will be a change in demeanor. When we are doing prevention and countering violent extremism, we like telling the population that these things don't happen as a surprise. There will be visible signs, but most people either are ignorant of what to look out for, or they choose to ignore for various reasons, including stigma. And so you expect that there will be some cultural or religious radicalization, isolation. So they move from what everyone else is doing and they seclude themselves. There will be some risk-taking behavior. They start talking in an agitated way when they talk about what it is they are believing in. Then there is the negative peer influence. They isolate themselves, and sometimes they go into seclusion, sometimes they will come back, but they come back changed and engage in violent talk. They spend long periods of time online, especially now, when there's a recruitment and radicalization in the online spaces. You find they spend time online. They have contact with known recruiters. And usually, the last act will be to disappear and maybe surface in combat theaters. So if I may just give our experience with radicalization through the decades in Kenya. In the 1990s, we saw radicalization by Al-Qaeda ideologues. It was physical, in physical spaces. And these were the people who were in charge of the attacks that we experienced as a country in the 90s. It was purely an ideology a foreign ideology coming from Al-Qaeda and their associates. But we have moved over time. And in 2000, the decade of 2000, we saw the entry of Kenyans and youth being drilled in physical spaces with the extreme ideology. We saw movement to combat theaters in big numbers. And then we saw in 2002 involvement of Kenyans as executors of an attack, but they were not the planners of the attack. One may ask, this was a long time ago. Yes, this was a long time ago. Our interaction with terrorism is a long dates back, but we were facing an enemy that we did not really appreciate exactly what was happening in those early stages, as opposed to today. Today it will be easy to find out what's happening and target that stopping the radicalization. Then we move to the 2015, 2021, on a lot of online radicalization in the social media spaces, the encrypted chats, distribution of violent material, and within the dark web. Then we also see the entry of the Daesh ideology, which I always say oxymoronically that the Daesh ideology compared to the Al-Qaeda ideology, sometimes you would think that the Al-Qaeda are more benevolent than Daesh, but still very, very lethal. And then the Daesh ideology spread when you know what happened in the Syria and the Levant spread, they morphed into a cyber caliphate. And then we see radicalization in prisons because persons are arrested, suspects are arrested, taken to prison, but because they believe in the cause, in the ideology, they believe that prison is part of what is ordained for them, and so they continue the radicalization in those spaces. So what type of narratives have we seen in our space? Group identity. People, especially the youth, looking with the puberty stages of the youth, looking for a figure to identify with, to feel like they belong to something. That we have seen in our urban and peri-urban spaces. A radicalizer comes up, promises the youth some meaning to life, and they join him. We have also seen, of course, the religious ideology. The religion is used as an ideology, but really, when they come down to action and terrorism, there's nothing religious about it. It's just most of the time a political cause. We have seen dehumanization of the victim, and this is something that is inherent in human beings. When you want to attack other human beings, you dehumanize the target that you want to attack so that you're justified in doing what you are doing. And of course, there have been the push and pull factors such as economic poverty and other perceived, real or perceived issues of marginalization within communities. What is the current situation, and one that really should concern us even within the criminal justice system? One is that there's rampant online radicalization, and this is where they share instructions, they will spread propaganda, and they recruit. And that is really rife within the online spaces. We're also seeing emergency of platforms, and there's so many platforms every day coming up, and of course the terrorists will take advantage of that to spread their narrative. We also see, we have seen in many of these combat theaters encouragement for prisoners, free prisoners, or cause a prison break, and that has really happened in some situations. And then we have seen concerted propaganda, especially within the media spaces, what Daesh calls the media jihad. They deliberately come up with video after video, recently calling upon that attacks on the countries that are supporting anti-Daesh efforts in Africa, and saying that you should target them, these countries, as part of the crusaders, or as they call them. And they mention the countries by name so that their population, or whoever they are targeting, would really be guided. For example, if you are in Kenya and you're encouraged to do something to stop the crusade against them, then you can take whatever weapon and carry out an attack wherever you are. And of course, we know that what Daesh did is that it also simplified what you call terrorist attacks, so that you don't have to go to the combat theater, or what they call the jihadi theater. You don't have to use big sophisticated weapons. You can, as Mohammed al-Adnani told them in 2017, the former spokesman of Daesh, that you can kill them, poison them, knife them, ram into them with vehicles. So that simplified the execution of the act of terrorism. We also see the utilization of new technology, and this is a challenge to the law of evidence, because we have seen anonymity and data centralization, for example, decentralized spaces. And if you're going to collect evidence against it, it's going to be some form of Herculean task. And also because this technology will be here today, tomorrow it morphs into something else. We have seen a new trend where we are seeing young people, juveniles, the recruiters or the ones being recruited in online spaces. And of course, we all know the law, as it should, protect juveniles. So that will also pose a challenge as to this radicalized young person who maybe you can't even detain or because of legal protections over them, then what do you do with them? We have also seen circumvention of content moderation, you know. If they know that if they post a video, it's going to be pulled down, then they have a way they are communicating, just post emojis, and their constituents will understand what it is that they mean. We have also, of course, of concern is crowdfunding, using fictitious charity organizations. That should worry us, especially when we are tracking money that is being used in organized crime. And of course, the combination of online and offline. So we can radicalize each other online, but plan for a physical meeting to actualize what it is that we want to do. We are also going to be facing now, of course, 3D printing. It's starting to, this conversation is very rife over the internet. And the UAV technology, its drones are here. They're being used in wars elsewhere. Of course, terrorists will also take them up and will use them for their targets. And that is something we have to grapple with in the present, not even in the future. So, there's also that challenge. That is an existential threat for any country, the lone and parkour attacks. And like I said, with simplification of attacks, it doesn't have to be a very sophisticated planning. Just with a firearm, you can go and kill 25 people in a place. Or just with a truck, you can ram into public spaces. And those images there are just showing up, for example, in our situation where 3 young girls decided they wanted to attack a police station, and they went with cocktails, some form of like Molotov cocktails, and attempted to attack a police station. Or just one man deciding he's going to attack police officers, manning a roadblock and being wrestled down. And how are we going to detect these signatures in the online spaces? I bring that photo there because that young man woke up one day, decided to answer to a call that Al-Shabaab had posted online by their leader, Abu Baida, telling them to undertake jihad anywhere, or what they call jihad. I don't like calling it jihad. But he woke up one day and decided that he was going to do the attack and killed 7 police officers. He was a police officer, killed 7 police officers in the process. And you can imagine, even before you know what exactly is happening, there is an attack somewhere, people are being killed. So he posted a few hours before he took the firearm that he was answering to that call. Of course, he was mentally unstable, it was established later, but he was online and decided that he was going to answer to that call. How are we going to be planning to prosecute such cases, and even more so, detection of these signatures online? And then within the criminal justice system, radicalization in prisons, of course, now with technologies, and with links to the free world, smuggling of phones and technology. If you put together the very seasoned radicals together with the ones that are being arrested with intent to radicalize, then by the time they are coming out, you will see a change. And we have had cases where even the people within the criminal justice system will tell you that on day one, they appeared before court and they looked very naive. But by the time you're finishing the hearing of this case, you have a totally different person who, even going through the criminal justice system, challenges the very theories of punishment and crime, that is deterrence and such other theories, because they are not deterred and they come out believing it's part of a struggle, it's part of a cause. And of course, even those that are out on bond is a challenge. They would still continue with radicalization and with the new technology. go to the next slide. What interventions then? Of course, prosecution, and I think that's part of the reason we are seated here, is a key intervention, like I said, and it is going to get more rigorous, especially with proof, the burden of proof and the law of evidence, and taking care of these emergent issues. Diversion, not everyone needs to be prosecuted, but it behoves us as practitioners to be able to have tools to distinguish or be able to isolate who can go through the full criminal justice to the terminal end and who can be taken midstream and change, because these people are, some of them are desirous of disengaging from these ideologies. Of course, there's prevention and countering of violent extremism, which is where we should have started, but we find ourselves doing reverse. But in Kenya, we have really taken up the call for prevention and countering within the community. This is a space that we really have to utilize and work with the communities to ensure that they come together and help us identify issues and also enlighten the community. The crime of terrorism is technical, and not everyone understands the process of radicalization or what it entails. So it needs a lot of capacity building. And of course, there is disengagement, what we call the DDRR in our situation, that those that are willing, even combatants that are willing to disengage, can do so within the criminal justice system, be de-radicalized, and allowed to live back, go back into the societies with a high degree of probability that they are going to live as normal citizens. Of course, it is not an exact science, but it's something that we must be willing and ready to do. And as I come to conclude, it's just asking ourselves, does everyone has to go through the criminal justice system to the end? Or are there instances where we can divert them? Let's move on. So why do we need to do prevention and countering? Because there's always that element. There is an ideologue, either physical or virtual now. There is an ideologue who is willing to tell the recruits what they want to. And then there is some innocent people that are exposed to this recruitment, and therefore you must be able to tell the communities that identify the ideologue. Also will come with measures that those that have already said the process of radicalization, we push them back before they get to violent extremism and therefore terrorism. And why do we disengage? Because we must admit that people have disengaged, actually disengaged from terrorist groups. This is a reality. Some because they went there looking for excitement and they are bored now. Others because they went there thinking there are so many promises, like we see in our situation. They get into those theaters and get very disillusioned, finding that there is nothing, that what they thought was jihad is not really jihad. Because governments incentivize them to disengage, or because they are families and friends. And we do this a lot working with communities. You can tell them to come back home. We will take them through systems, because either way they will die in that combat theater, or they will come back and kill people, and that is not our desired. Even for the communities and families, not their desired end. Others just went there looking for career opportunities. They realized there's nothing like that. Some are captured, all because a terrorist organization has been completely been defeated, and therefore we have to be able to learn how to embrace them and take them through a process. What are the choices they have when they disengage? And that's why it should concern us. Some will continue staying in those combat theaters and morph into some other roles. Others will secretly return and want to self-integrate within communities. And if you have a combatant coming back and seeking to stay within communities, then it is dangerous, because you don't know the skills they have obtained, you don't know their capacity, their mental status. Most of those people come back very conflicted because they have engaged in very serious atrocities. And as individuals, as human beings, they cannot live with it. And so you don't want such an unstable person loose in the society. Others will join criminal gangs or other terror groups. Others will report back to government. But others will travel. And these are where the considerations of mutual legal assistance comes in, because some will try to move from one country to another, maybe try to seek a new identity and get a new lease of life. And so, finally, as I come to conclude, I just want to show that, to remind everyone, each one of us here, that terrorism is a crime of ideology. Even though Most of those may not be real ideologues. There is a component of ideology in it. I look at that picture, and I just want to share it with you because that was a picture of the attackers in Kenya that carried out an attack in 2019 in Nairobi. And that was just before they went to carry out the attack. And the person in the middle, looking very smart, was the suicide bomber who blew himself up outside a cafeteria. And the others were the infantry suiciders that came in and started shooting everyone else. And that they posed, of course, for propaganda later, just before they moved to the venue of the attack. And the person on the right, I hope that's the right, the man in dark glasses was the mastermind of this attack. And so what have we done? We have engaged the mother of the mastermind of this attack to move her also, because she's a victim. She knew her child had gone to the combat theaters. She reported that. Then he comes and kills people. As a mother, she felt very overloaded by the whole emotion that her child has contributed to the death of so many people. And that, of course, is the element of, did I do my job right as a parent? So what we did, when we reach out to the victims, we consider those that are suffering stigma as a result of actions that they did not directly contribute to, and we bring them back from victimhood to let them be ambassadors. And this is the last slide now, I will conclude with just a small clip of that mother, because we've been working with her, and one of the questions we asked her was, what were the signs that you saw in your child?
Jana wangu pandia ya mienendo yake tangu dogoni mpaka hapo alifika hakuwa na mienendo mbaya, lakini upandia mavazi alipobadilisha ndio nilianza kushtuka kidogo. Nikaona kijana yangu alikuwa ni mtu anapenda kuvaa t-shirt na majins, hiyo ameachana naye. Kijana ameingilia kuvaa hata kanzu, vile aliingia kuvaa hiyo kanzu yake akuvaa vile kisheria ya dini inatakikana. Yake alivaa ikawa imekatwa kama 3/4 hivi, haifiki chini kabisa. Na pia upandia sura pia alichange ndevu zake, akafuga ndevu. Nikawa namwambia zinifurahishi, punguza hizi vitu, sitaki kukuona naye. Na akawa sasa akawa sasa ameingia sana kujiweka busy na kusoma.
So that's just to show that the trends are there, they are visible, they see. Do people know about them? Are they willing to report on them? The signatures are out there, and I think it behoves all of us to know, even within the criminal justice system, you will take someone to prison when they are very green because they had maybe an offense of planning to travel, but by the time they come out and you will be meeting them, it's good to also observe these trends because they will come out of the prison completely different individuals who have not actually changed for the worse. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا دكتورة على هذه المداخلة القيمة التي جمعت بين النظري والتطبيقي. وحفاظا على الوقت أدعو فخامة السيد بابا دوكو محمد رئيس النيابة العامة بدولة مداخلتي.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'll be speaking to you. I'll be sharing Nigerian experience in preventing the spread of radicalization amongst youth, especially in detention facilities. After the emergence of Boko Haram insurgency in Nigeria, the Nigerian government came to the realization that radicalization fuels and sustains extremism and insurgency. At this point, Nigeria had to do something. And what we did was to adopt a two-pronged approach. One of which was, in 2016, we created an institution, a facility, known as Operation Safe Corridor, a sort of special purpose vehicle to deal with issues of radicalization among youth. The mandate of this Operation Safe Corridor target two vulnerable groups. One comprised of victims, abductees that were rescued or arrested from the front line. They are normally profiled, screened, and sent to this facility. The mandate of this facility is to help in rehabilitating, de-radicalizing, and reintegrating these youth. We refer to them as low-level operatives. So we do not prosecute them, we do not send them to detention facilities. The Operation Safe Corridor is equipped with manpower, expertise, in psychologists, religious leaders that undertake this process of rehabilitation, de-radicalization, and reintegration. The facility is also equipped with vocational facilities in various trades to prepare these, we call them clients, not inmates, to prepare them for life after the facility. The period ranges between 3 months and 6 months, after which they graduate, and they are normally given sort of start-up capital to start up business in their respective communities. The Operation Safe Corridor also interact with their communities to avoid issues to do with rejection. They sensitize the communities to take them back and cooperate with them. The other approach is, in 2019, we repealed the Prison Act and replaced it with Correctional Service Act. The Correctional Service Act 2019 focuses more on correction, reformation, rehabilitation, and reintegration. So the prison service, or the correctional service officials are trained in psychology. You have religious leaders embedded in the correctional service to expose the inmate to moral and religious education. The inmates are also given access for continuing education. Some inmates in our correctional institutions graduate and obtain degrees while serving terms. Some are trained in vocational art, trades, shoemaking, and all sorts of trade. So these are some of the approaches, and the general approach is public enlightenment. The government engages religious leaders, community leaders in programs, in televisions, road shows, to preach religion in moderate tones, to sensitize the youth against extremism and radicalization. And this is ongoing. The Operation Safe Corridor is situated somewhere in Gombe. It has a capacity of about 2,000 clients. The Operation Safe Corridor also take ex-terrorist convicts. So after convicted terrorists serve term, we do not release them into the society. They are taken straight to Operation Safe Corridor for another 6 months of period of rehabilitation, de-radicalization, and reintegration. Because whilst in detention facility, it's possible that these inmates still retain their ideologies. But we also took a step further to ensure that all terrorist suspects, we have a special facility. We don't mix them with other inmates. We have a holding facility somewhere in a military facility in Wawa, where at the moment we have over 2,000 inmates awaiting trial. So we segregate, we don't mix them with other inmates. So those are essentially our approach to preventing radicalization in our detention facilities and in the society at large. Thank you very much.
Thanks. شكرا جزيلا فخامة السيد الرئيس على هذه المداخلة الشيقة، ومن بين ما شدني إليها إعادة برامج التوعية والمصالحة، تعزيز قيم التسامح والاعتدال من خلال إصلاح الحقل الديني. احتراما للوقت كذلك أدعو الدكتور إيران ميغاس مستشار بدولة الموزمبيق الشقيقة المكلف بتدبير كتابة الجمعية وذلك لإلقاء مداخلته.
Bom dia a todos e a todas. Muito bom dia a todos. Sua Excelência, o digníssimo procurador.
A small what is experience of Mozambique in control of the trafficking in the city. Thank you very much. I will speak in Portuguese, I'm sorry, but I want to believe that our colleagues in the interpretation booth will support me in interpretation. The topic that we propose to present has to do with the role of the prosecutors of the DPP in the prevention and countering terrorism, violent extremism. It's spread in the prisons. We will approach the topic in three important points. The first one, I will talk about the will take the role of the prosecutor of the DPP in countering terrorism and its spread in the prisons. Also, I'll talk about the challenges and also the conclusions. Mozambique, just like other countries, African countries, that faces organized crime and transnational crimes. I want to highlight terrorism. As for the first scenarios that we specified on terrorism and also violent extremism, I would like to say that from 2010 up to 2016, we started to see some movements of citizens and also foreigners that were moving to the hinterland or the countryside of the country, but particularly in the provinces of Cabo Delgado. As you can see here on the screen, you can already see on the screen that Cabo Delgado is a province on the north of Mozambique, and the most affected zones are the darker colors. Here we have the district of Palma, Mocimbo, da Praia, that are on the coastal zones of the country. At the time, the law on the crime of terrorism at around 2013, to be more precise, one of the leaders of the terrorists was detained, and a group of citizens, followers of this leader, tried to attack the prison so that they can be able to rescue their leader. Therefore, because these prosecutors and also magistrate didn't have contact with or any technical experience about this phenomenon. The prosecutors didn't know how to deal with this situation, and so most of them were absolved. 21 were accused and tried not for terrorism, but another type of crime that had at least 1 year sentence. In 2017, the phenomenon of terrorism started to evolve. The characteristics that we had seen before of the attacks with the knives and other light arms evolved now to the use of sophisticated weapons like bigger arms, more sophisticated weapons, basically. Like you can see on this photo, this type of image is advertisement that is used a lot by the terrorists in carrying out their actions. In the 21 young people that were convicted after finishing the 1 year sentence, they were freed, and they went to Musimo da Praia, where they joined other terrorists, and they continued to carry out terrorism act. According to the information that was circulated, when they were in the prison, they vowed to be united forever. After these facts, with the evolution of the terrorism phenomena, Mozambique approved 2 laws. One, the first one, for strengthening and clarify terrorism as a crime. That also we approved later. 13, the law of 2022 of 8th of July that brought very important materials that have to do with the prevention of radicalization. This law has preventative measures, just like embargoes for trips and staying in the territory, and also we have interventions for radicalizations, and also security measures, and also surveillance, electronic surveillance, and also cyber security, because we had seen signs that because we had some bank transfers through electronic means to be able to finance terrorism and these terrorists. Also, this lay sanctions the proliferation of mass destruction, and also it sanctions radicalization, collection and dissemination of information of articles, extremist articles. Also, it brings some mechanism for collecting evidence in a more in a better way. As for the mechanism to control the inmates of terrorism and violent extremism in the prisons, in principle, prison agents that work with the inmates, these terrorists, they have some kind of a profile, professional qualification, personal qualifications, and also having some technical skills, and also they are encouraged to carry out dialogues with the inmates so that they can persuade, so that they can change their behavior, and also the introduction of psychologists that help to find out the motivation of these terrorists or a person that involve themselves in terrorism, and also there are some studies of a better way of how changing this attitude. The involvement of the victims and also the defenders of the victims of terrorism is another mechanism that is used so to be able to persuade the terrorists to be able to change their behavior. The same for former terrorists and also violent extremists. Members of the families and members of the community also as another mechanism of persuasion to counter these terrorist acts and also these behaviors, terrorism behaviors, mainly these inmates. The role of the prosecutors, there's a law. We need to have some registration of the information of these inmates. Therefore, this they need to have information about these inmates also. From a preventive point of view, carry out talks, and also we talk with these prison officials, because these are the officials that have more information about the profile of these inmates. And also, it's up to the DPP to evaluate the risk of radicalization and promote sentence isolation of these inmates from the point of view of repression, so to speak. The DPP has to oversight execution of these sentences, assure better relationship between these managers and also these inmates. In spite of these mechanisms that we have, Mozambique still faces challenges in combating terrorism and radicalization, mainly because of overcrowding in the prisons is a reality. As you can see on this photo, there's a lot of overcrowding. Another challenging is convincing these inmates, terrorist inmates, to unlink themselves from this violence. We hold talks, but that is not enough to be able to convince them to unlink themselves from this vice. And also, it's a challenge to improve training on violent extremists, especially for the managers of these prisons. Rehabilitation and reinsertion, social insertion of these inmates, because it's very common that after when they finish their sentences, they go back to join other terrorists. Because they had a very big or long sentences, like we have seen from the previous speaker. In conclusion, I'd like to say that the conclusion that we have here is that radicalization and violent extremism in the prison is a reality. The countering terrorism and violent extremism has to go hand in hand with preventative actions to prevent this radicalization. We need to have regular visits, and also we need to collect information between the DPP and other actors in the prison services is very important, so that we can be able to avoid radicalization of the inmates and also violent extremists in the prisons. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور على هذه المداخلة.
Intervention. Now we go to say to Madam Machoda, the leader, the head of witness protection in Kenya, and we welcome her to give her talk.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Safety, intelligence, and trust is very essential to responding to this kind of violent crime, the crime of terrorism. In Kenya, and that's an experience I'll share, because of our inability to be able to prosecute effectively cases of terror, the Witness Protection Agency was born. As you heard from my colleague from Kenya, from NCTC, Dr. Ari spoke about the Kikambala attack in 2002. It was only when we were able to start thinking about the Witness Protection Agency which came into being in 2006. That is when we were able to start effectively prosecuting this kind of serious crimes. In this region, that was our first liaison because of the attack that was there in the coastal region. We had a witness who said that if you want me to testify, you must assure me of my safety and you must relocate me out of this country. That is the only time we were able to get crucial evidence. And therefore, that shows the importance of a witness protection agency. That is the story of Kenya. Now, when it comes specifically to prisons and inmates, as an agency, we protect inmates. We actually call them justice collaborators. And because our protection is a last resort, we protect those justice collaborators who may be accused of a certain crime, like terror, but then through the plea bargain of DPP, are ready to collaborate and assist the prosecution with crucial investigation. Justice collaborators may also be people who are serving time in prison and are ready to work and cooperate with prosecution or other law enforcement agencies. Because of this service of witness protection, we've had then to work very closely with the Kenya Prison Service, who sit on the advisory board of the Witness Protection Agency and the office and the Director of Public Prosecution, so that we can be able to provide the critical protection that these justice collaborators provide. As an agency, we provide, we maintain the witness protection program, but we also have a second mandate of advising both state and non-state actors on how to promote and utilize measures and strategies on witness protection. Again, the experience in this country, in Western Kenya, when we had extreme violence in the Mount Elgon region, the witness protection program also came into place to support those witnesses who are willing to provide crucial information to the prosecution for successful prosecution. The lessons learned in Kenya are that it is very important for both the prosecution, the police service, and the prisons service to work together with the Witness Protection Agency because of the nature of testimony that you may need and require for successful prosecution. To be able to do that, one other thing that we have begun doing is to look at the various policies and laws that we have and ask ourselves whether they are responsive to responding to the witness protection as a critical service in the administration of justice, or we are reacting to that service. And that is very essential because the program provides both the safety and the welfare of the witness. Therefore, training of prosecutors, training of investigators, training of judicial officers who are working with justice collaborators become then very essential. We have had the opportunity to review policies that interrogate them from a witness protection perspective, issues of bail, the policy on bail and bond, the policy around sentencing, the policy about diversion. The Children's Act 2022 now is very responsive to issues of where witnesses are children and are able to provide crucial information for prosecution. The Victim Protection Act has also come to be an important element in terms of witness protection. It's an area of law that is yet to be developed concretely in this country, but is very essential, and you've seen how it has played out with the previous presentation of NCTC. Lastly, as I end, I want to say that I think it is very important for us to have cross-border collaboration, and as an agency, we have developed reciprocal regulations that will facilitate reciprocal protection, relocation, and support across the region so that we are able to work with each other as states in Africa. Joint training across border is also very, very essential. As an agency, we are keen on providing coaching and mentorship to ensure that the witness protection agencies or units across border are effective and are properly legislated so that we are able to provide reciprocal protection accordingly. So thank you very much for that.
شكرا جزيلا السيدة المديرة الفاضلة على هذه المداخلة الشيقة.
For this, I'm very good. Alana, I call upon, Khalid Mosa, for the head of the director of Haki Africa for his intervention. He's welcome.
Thank you very much. Let me appreciate the DPP Kenya for the opportunity to be here. My name is not Hussein Khalid. I'm standing in for my colleague Hussein Khalid, who couldn't make it to this important event. Let me start by saying we come from a civil society organization called Haki Africa. Haki Africa is a grassroots human rights organization which started in Mombasa. Now we are a Pan-African organization that is heading up to other countries within Africa. I think this opportunity was given to us by the fact that we have a partnership, a working relationship with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution on projects that we are implementing with the ODPP as civil society organizations, including IJM, who are also here, and many other organizations that also are here. We appreciate the partnership that we have with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution in terms of dealing with issues on violent extremism. My work basically involves on documentation and follow-up of human rights cases that are brought to our attention. Some of these cases involve issues to do with extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances. We have programs on violent extremism. We have legal aid clinics that we partner with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, where we have the Office of the ODPP going to the grassroots level with us to listen to the cases that are there at the grassroots level and be able to address the issues that are actually affecting the communities. So it is through this partnership of legal aid clinics, human rights forum, town hall meetings, that we partner with the DPP, that we've been able to create a belief in the justice system. I think the most important work that we do is to really create a belief in the justice system, because we receive cases of people whose rights have been violated, and they will tell you that the only way is to revenge and go back or go to other countries and be able to revenge for their family members who are killed on involvement to do with issues of terrorism. But we try to show them the other way, that this is the other way to go, that you do not have to cross the border to be able to get justice for your family members, that we can go follow up on these matters and take them to court and bring to justice all those that have been involved in the killings of their family members. So through this, we've been able to create a belief in the justice system. And let me say that we had let the government at some point fight terror with terror. But we at some point felt like it wasn't bringing fruits. Fighting terror with terror ends up even bringing more young people being radicalized, or even bringing more young people to be to be lured to get into issues of violent extremism. And I think at some point when we saw the fact that the terrorists were using our own children, that it reached a point where our own children, children that we schooled, children that we took to the best universities, children that we really had hope that they will bring a better future for the families, getting into issues of terrorism is actually the point that we felt that we probably need to get into this fight and offer a counter narrative on the issues that they were being involved into. And we have been able to get a lot of benefits out of this, and we are now seeing that the Mombasa, or the coastal city that it used to be, where everybody used to say that this would be a place where more young people will be involved in issues to do with violent extremism, we have seen a stop of it. And through these initiatives with the ODPP, through these initiatives that we have with the community, we have been able to solve a bit of the problems that we have. But let me say, one major challenge would be on the link between the ODPP, the police, civil society organizations. I think we need to work together, because if the police are not able to do good investigation on the case and the matter is brought to court, you end up releasing the suspects. And when the suspects are released, the people that had actually arrested them feel like there's a loophole, or there's a way that even when we bring investigation, that this matters, the people that we take to court are actually being released. So that's when you get to hear of cases of extrajudicial killings, because the police believe there's a gap somewhere. So they, on that gap, they may end up involving themselves on issues to do with extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances. So this partnership that we have with the ODPP, this link that we have with the police to do a thorough investigation, this link that we also have with the community coming to us, telling us of their children who have actually gotten lost or traveled to a different country they do not know, is able to cut on the issues of violent extremism. I think as an organization, we were dealing with cases of people who want to return back to the country, or what people who we call returnees. So we would take the returnees, take their names to the National Counter-Terrorism Office, but then at some point we felt like the names that we were taking of the people who actually had returned were actually being killed. The same young people, or the names that we took, eventually end up being killed in what we call extrajudicial killing. So that made us to stop that program. But I think it was a good program, because many young people wanted to return to the country. And if we formulate policies and laws that can be able to ensure their reintegration back to the community, we would be able to solve a bit of the cases. So in a nutshell, I wouldn't speak much, but just to say that we appreciate the partnership, and we continue asking you, even in your respective countries, that you are able to do a partnership between the civil society organizations with the office of the ODPP, like the way we are doing in Kenya, to be able to solve on the issues of violent extremism. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
شكرا جزيلا الأستاذ الفاضل على هذه المداخلة القيمة. وأدعو السيد مايكل سانغ المساعد الأول لرئيس النيابة العامة بدولة كينيا الشقيقة للإدلاء بمداخلته.
I appreciate the speakers who just spoke before me. I think I would quickly react, in a few minutes, just react to a few issues that were brought up by the presenter, Dr. Nyawira from NCTC, Kenya. It's a valuable, it's very important and valuable that Dr. Nyawira's presentation went into the in-depth aspects of radicalization and the stages from radicalization all the way to terrorism. The radicalization, extremism, violent extremism, to terrorism. That was quite an in-depth presentation. Thank you, Dr. Nyawira. I realized that DPP Nigeria's comparative experience mirrors Kenya's measures and countermeasures on preventing and countering violent extremism. I also wish to point out that the Deputy Attorney General Mozambique, clearly, I am reminded when she was just giving her presentation of a meeting that, a regional high-level meeting of SADC heads of public prosecutions and criminal investigation agencies on the fight against terrorism, violent extremism, and its financing. That took place on the 15th and 16th of September 2022 in Maputo, Mozambique. That was quite valuable because it's still on the subject matter. And DPP Nigeria was present in that meeting, among other SADC representatives, DPPs. The meeting actually ended on a high note with the signing of the Maputo Declaration by DPPs from SADC, countries with far-reaching commitments on jurisdictional cooperation and collaboration on PCVE. Some of those DPPs are present here today. Still, on the subject matter, a delegation from the Attorney General's office will be visiting Kenya, that is from Mozambique, I understand, for an exchange with DPP Kenya and NCTC Kenya. So that's a very important forum that hopefully would be happening next week. I also want to appreciate Director Witness Protection Agency through her presentation on the Witness Protection Act. And she touched as well on the Victim Protection Act. And I'm aware that, and this is something that's important, that the regulations, there are pending regulations as far as the Victim Protection Act is concerned, and that is something that is to be finalized. But it was quite an insightful presentation. I echo her presentation in all ways. Mr. Shepeta also, partnership with DPP is something that I will just quickly go into in my presentation, in my brief presentation, because this is something that we have seen a lot of gains when it comes to partnerships between Haki Africa, Kenya, with ODPP and NCTC to promote open dialogues with at-risk communities. And even on the aspect of returnees that he commented right at the end, with NCTC, we are slowly and quickly, I would say we are quickly changing and adopting a human rights-based approach. So quickly, I would quickly go into my presentation on the mechanisms and tools for prosecutors in the involvement in countering CVE. Sensitization of the public is something Mr. Shepet has already touched about. We've worked very closely with NCTC and with Haki Africa Kenya and NCTC Kenya in some of these criminal justice accountability programs. Capacity building for prosecutors. This is something that is still ongoing. This is to ensure that prosecutors, especially those working in the counterterrorism division, understand the radicalization, disengagement, and reintegration programs offered by NCTC Kenya. And of course, strengthening cooperation. I would like to quickly point out that last year, and I mentioned this earlier this morning, that we launched interagency guidelines, ODPP Kenya, last year, and the interagency guidelines combined state and non-state actors. NCTC Kenya was part of it, and Haki Africa was part of it, among other law enforcement agencies. And one of the critical issues when you go into that guideline, which is available online on the ODPP website, ODPP Kenya website, is a guideline on psychosocial assessment of suspects relative to radicalization. Dr. Nyawira pointed out earlier on issues of radicalization at those early stages. When those individuals are apprehended, it is important, and we have infused this into the system to come up with a psychosocial assessment report. This is a tool for objective assessment conducted by a qualified and licensed professional. This is pursuant to the statutory requirements of the Counselors and Psychologists Act of 2014 in Kenya. This particular tool adds value to decision making, allowing investigators, prosecutors, and judicial officers to take appropriate steps depending on the levels of radicalization of any terror suspect. And this is something that we mirror DPP Nigeria's presentation. On the issues of disengagement, Dr. Nyawira pointed out very clearly. What I would like to say is disengagement is not a terminal solution. It's not an end in itself. It is a means to an end. There's always a possibility of a relapse or terror suspects reoffending. We are wide awake to that eventuality. But I wish also to point out that it's a voluntary process. The disengagement, rehabilitation and reintegration program is a voluntary process, and suspects are not forced into that program. So we keep on fostering our partnerships between state and non-state actors as prosecutors. And I would like to quickly point out that early last year, we partnered, ODPP Kenya partnered with NCTC and Haki Africa, Kenya, to come up with good practices for enhancing access to justice in preventing and countering violent extremism. The handbook presents 11 good practices for justice actors, some of which have been pointed out by Mr. Shepeta. I'll quickly just mention them. Training all staff on preventing and countering violent extremism, identifying and appointing focal points on PCVE, setting up of resource centers within justice actors, having an open door policy for the public to surrender information that is crucial as far as PCVE is concerned, coming up with service charters amongst our agencies on how to deal with violent extremism, applying the human rights-based approach to what Mr. Shepeta alluded earlier on the aspects of returnees. This is something that NCTC is implementing very closely in partnership with DPP Kenya, a human rights-based approach on returnees and in this subject matter as well. And promoting interagency partnership, that is another practice. Encouraging partnerships with civil society, that has been alluded to as well. And hosting public dialogues. Mr. Shepeta pointed that out earlier, that we hold public dialogues with at-risk communities and on preventing and countering violent extremism. This is a program and it's a mandate for the NCTC Kenya. It's run by NCTC Kenya, but we work in close collaboration with Dr. Nyawira as well. Fidelity to the law is something that is part of the good practices, and of course sharing experiences like we are doing right now across jurisdictions so that we can be able to combat this vice. One quick comment. Disengagement fuses into some of the policies that we have at ODPP Kenya. When at the early stages of disengagement, it's important to point out the kind of individual, what level of radicalization, the kind of terror suspect that we're dealing with. It fuses very well with the alternatives to prosecution, such as plea bargaining and diversion. So with this specific tool of the psychosocial assessment report that is done by a forensic psychologist, we are able to get into the mind. Remember, Dr. Nyawira mentioned that this is ideology-based. We have to get into the mind of the young individuals who are vulnerable, who are at risk, the young, the youth, and we are able to get that insight into that manner, that ideology. So I think one of the challenges, many were mentioned by Dr. Nyawira, but I'll just end by saying recidivism. This is something that we've witnessed. Some of the examples that were given in her case scenarios earlier, we've seen aspects of recidivism where the same youth cycle back and go into violent extremism. And that's a challenge that we have faced as prosecutors. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا الأستاذ فاضل على هذه المداخلة الشيقة ونشكر جميع السادة الخبراء على مداخلتهم.
All the speakers for the intervention, and thank you all you very much for listening. We now open the door for discussion. The time that we set only 5 minutes only, and we will take only 2 questions from the left, from right and left. We take only 2 questions.
ميكرو.
In Iraq and Syria, working closely on the lines liberation and from IS areas. So one of the things that was discussed today, Your Excellencies, is the ideology. And we know that when we come to IS, they reuse ideology. For instance, they reuse the ideology of Jahiliyyah, which we know it was based on Qutb and Ibn Tumayyah. And they introduced new ideology of takfir, taking the Muslim population and acknowledging them as pre-Islamic barbarism, as becoming too Western. Now, why the reason I'm saying this is there any mechanism in place? Because we know in a post-9/11 world, the attacks on the Muslim population in minority areas have increased. The second short question is that we also know that prisons like Abu Ghraib in Iraq were actually breeding grounds for terrorism. We know as well terrorists like Baghdadi actually got some of the education he had in Abu Ghraib. Are there any mechanism in place, and are you working directly with religious leaders on combating these ideas? Thank you.
نعم. السؤال الثاني تفضل. السؤال الثاني والأخير. ميكرو. نعتذر لأن الوقت ذهبنا.
Thank you very much. I'm Alfred Tia Yeboah, Deputy Attorney General of Ghana and Deputy Minister of Justice. Now, Ghana is very much interested in this discussion because of where we are located. Our neighbors have all been attacked. Now, my question goes to DPP Nigeria. He spoke about rehabilitation and reintegration. Is there any post-reintegration process for those extremists who are brought back to society? If so, how effective is such a process? Thank you very much.
شكرا. الآن أفسح المجال للسادة الخبراء 3 دقائق لمن أراد أن يجيب على الأسئلة المطروحة لهم.
Thank you very much. Yes, there is post-integration process. I did say in my presentation that we have three categories of the process of rehabilitation, de-radicalization, and reintegration. We have ex-convicted terrorists. After serving term, during trial, we ensure that before sentencing, we apply to the court that after sentencing and after serving sentence, the inmate should not be released to the public. He should be taken to the Operation Safe Corridor. And that is where the post-integration process takes place. Altogether, you start with rehabilitation, de-radicalization, and then reintegration. And the reintegration process actually involves the communities to avoid stigmatization. Before graduation, after graduation, like I said earlier on, they are given a startup capital to set up business. But before then, the authorities of the Operation Safe Corridor establishes contact with this community and sensitize the community leaders and the community generally on the need to reabsorb and accept them back into the community. So that is the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me answer to the question on mechanisms and whether we work with religious leaders. National Counterterrorism Center stands in between the communities and the security. We are the bridge, and we work a lot with the religious leaders, especially in counter narratives, because we understand that the field of narratives can be very technical, and we may not have the expertise to deal with that. So we leave it to the religious leaders who are experts in the region and also opinion leaders, and we let them take lead in that, and we just coordinate their activities. Thank you.
You didn't answer the second part of your question, how successful? I did say we have terrorists that renounce terrorism after serving term. Some of them actually continue their studies in custody and graduated with degrees. That is how successful it has been.
إذن شكرا. نصل الآن إلى نهاية هذه الجلسة الرابعة، ونشكر السادة الخبراء على هذه الاستراتيجيات الفضلة التي يمكن
strategies and good practices that we can and we must adopt them for fighting, countering extremism. And thank you very much, and may peace be upon you, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The session moderator, the presenter, and the panelists. We have of our conference. We are now going to break for lunch for 1 hour. We report here at 2:30 for the 5th session. And before we do that, we have one announcement. That is all participants for the AGM, which is slated for this afternoon, to carry with them the special AGM folders which have been provided. And the other announcement is that we return the excursion program which we have been given for planning purposes. Thank you and bon appetit.